This is EQ Samuels, and welcome to the Brimming Pot. This is my first show. It will totally rule, I hope. Maybe it won't. Hey, no one said you had to listen. Anywho, this show will not be politically correct at all times, I assure you of that. And you may be pulled along the winding track that follows through my mind. And meanwhile, you'll wonder how and why I think the way that I do, but I promise you, it's all coming from a good place, aside from the occasionally crass delivery system that's used. This show will also give you a glimpse at my personal view on politics, relationships, and more, such as federal state-funded business ventures, for example. I will also tie into current norms and cultures within our present society. Please note, and I mean please, I am not a licensed therapist or paid bartender, just a human being with a conscious mind. Now, to give you a brief synopsis of myself, and without boring you to death, my name is EQ Samuels, and I hail from the Chicago area. LA is where I call home for now, as I aspire for greater things, like becoming a full-fledged screenwriter and producer. I run a fairly biased and journalistic blog at medium.com. Just search for EQ Samuels. You can find me on Twitter under the same handle, and also on Facebook under the Brimming Pot podcast. I'm going to start off by covering a story. Some of it will be paraphrased or improved, but these personal experiences that were shared with me will never be forgotten. The story will begin in the trenches of a skilled nursing facility that an inside source of mine worked in. It is called Vernon Healthcare, formerly Vernon Convalescent. My inside source, of who I will introduce to you eventually, was there from the spring of 2011 and into the summer of 2012. This facility is currently being investigated by the DOJ for patient abuse, neglect, billing fraud, hostile living environments. Well, you get the idea. Also, the FBI is lingering with alleged charges of Medicare fraud, Medi-Cal fraud, among other things. The ownership resides under an unassociated family trust name, an LLC, for legal reasons. So only one facility at a time can be prosecuted, instead of the ownership in its entirety. These people, the owners, are pretty crafty, evading the criminal justice system however they can while bleeding helpless patients dry from as much of their Social Security and insurance money as humanly possible. The people that own and or operate these awful containment camps essentially sell their souls to the devil just for a piece of the pie. And to clarify, these facilities operate under the funding of social welfare programs. These social programs are a part of what you and I pay taxes for. So when these ownerships nickel and dime the patients at every turn, they also screw you over while they carry out this blatant, inhumane activity on living, breathing, occasionally helpless individuals. My source, let's call him Mr. Quandary, and his time at this horrid place was something to marvel at, lasting just shy of 2 years amid his outreach attempts to the FBI and the Department of Justice. Mr. Quandary told me this very eye-opening piece of information, and I quote him here: "I saw beyond the surface of delusional psych patients' pain, their internal struggles, drug addictions, past convictions, and anything else they had to endure, only for them to be welcomed by a slew of long-term poison, or medication as it's commonly referred to." Mr. Quandary continued, "That developmental sludge is a nice blanket for mental and emotional problems, while your stomach and liver dissolve over time. Here you go. Enjoy. Enjoy your meds." From the formerly paint-chipped walls of Vernon to the newly remodeled dungeon of germs and insanity that are still present there, many questions regarding integrity and empathy are present at all times. The depravity of humanity and what the almighty dollar has devolved into is astonishing, isn't it? Aside from this, from what I've been told through the grapevine of sources, is that the DA, the district attorney, is leery of pursuing this case. And to make matters worse, the The Vernon ownership is so divvied up that you would have to fight off every one of their individual lawyers that they have on retainer. And now for a commercial break. A quick shout out to smoothriverstudios.com for co-producing the audio for this episode. For all of your production and post-production audio needs, go to smoothriverstudios.com. Now, I am going to introduce you to a man named Shlomo Rechnitz, the 5% owner of Vernon Healthcare in partnership with a man named Chaim Kolodny, the managing partner and majority owner. Vernon Healthcare falls under Brius Healthcare Services, like Prius, but with a B, and that is owned by Shlomo. Hint, hint, this is all public record. Just go online and you will find just about whatever you want, aside from any pending litigation. Shlomo is a crafty businessman and philanthropist, as he funnels multiple business structures throughout a number of subsidiaries. In doing so, this limits his liability and muddies the waters if prosecution becomes an issue. Now, I'm going to pause here to do a little flashback. In 2006, Rechnitz bought his first nursing home in Gardena, California. In 1998, Rechnitz incorporated TwinMed LLC in Los Angeles with his twin brother Steve. TwinMed distributes medical supplies and solutions throughout the United States to nursing homes and hospitals. They are based in Santa Fe Springs, California, and have warehouses in California, Texas, Illinois, Ohio, Florida, and New Jersey. Shlomo is also the owner of Brius Healthcare Services. Rechnitz runs over 80 facilities in California. In 2014, 23 nursing homes owned by Rechnitz received a total of 50 serious deficiencies graded G, as in goat, or higher by the federal government, nearly triple the state average according to any anonymous investigation. Let me paint the picture of nursing home grading scales for you. If your facility is rated G, it has signs of actual harm that do not result in immediate jeopardy. Thus, it is an isolated incident, so to speak. If your facility is higher than G, immediate jeopardy to staff and/or patients' health and safety is present. There is a sliding scale of ratings pertaining to J, K, and L. J, as in Jerry, is isolated. K represents a pattern of this activity, and L, as in Larry, or Looney, is widespread danger throughout the facility. In October 2015, the FBI raided one of his facilities, the Alta Vista Healthcare and Wellness Center in Riverside, California. They were seeking evidence in relation to alleged criminal activity. And prior to that, recently in 2014, Vernon Healthcare was raided by the Department of Justice for the same reasons previously mentioned. In case you were wondering where this story blossomed from, I'm familiar with a former employee that got everything started by first reporting everything to the health department. Everything that was within his power, of course. This employee was a whistleblower, so to speak. Upon interviewing this employee, you could say we got along just fine. I was told of stories that the health department is allegedly in cahoots with Vernon Healthcare. This wasn't really a big surprise. Generally, corporations have lobbyists, department heads, and decision makers in their back pockets. Vernon's staff developer at the time decided to lay off select staff members because of one or more employees that were responsible for the outreach attempts to the health department. The reason I know this is because a little birdie told me that the former social services director approached the staff developer with a notice from the health department. This notice was about that very same Vernon employee's plea to the health department about what was going on. All of these actions spawned a chain of events that resulted in Administrator Mendel Dubinsky being replaced, a general overhaul of staff duties and patient care procedures, and in turn, these actions basically turned the facility into a modern-day concentration camp. The facility management laid low for the time being and was cautious with every move. They tightened up their medical billing department, quote-unquote monitored patient activity more closely, and created an understaffed and hostile work environment. Prior to the layoff, Mr. Quandary was a glorified babysitter of psych patients. Whenever they would come into the facility and become disruptive to the flow of business, Mr. Quandary and select staffers would be required to monitor them closely. Just a side note here, severely disturbed individuals with drug-induced mentalities or developmental and/or physical limitations require more sensitive psychiatric attention. But for the sake of the dollar signs that these patients represent, they are confined to places such as this. Although if they're healthy enough, their options are limited to skilled nursing homes or the streets, depending on their insurance status. In California, if you are a high-value patient with full Medicare and Medi-Cal, the director of nurses will most likely hold you hostage, even if your family is trying to get you out. Be cognizant of this when you're looking for a place for your loved ones to live. The world is cruel, and some people deserve to die. As harsh as that sounds, it's true. The people that deserve to die are the ones that do not care for human lives. If you want your loved ones to live, do your homework. But if you set up an in-home care situation, you're much, much better off.
And now for a commercial break. A quick shout out to smoothriverstudios.com for co-producing the audio for this episode. For all of your production and post-production audio needs, go to smoothriverstudios.com.
All right, back to Vernon. Among all of this horrid rat trapping, and during the ongoing investigation, more and more psych patients were brought into the facility. Let me say that again, just for emphasis. While all of this was going on, even the investigation, more and more psych patients were brought into the facility. I'm going to give you an example of one of these psych patients. His name was George K. He was about 6'5" or so, and he resembled a more weathered version of the late Herman Munster, but without the makeup. George was a pleasant guy, but he had been through the ringer. The things he had seen and been a party to were not of this world. He was kept underneath the stairs for quite some time when he was younger, and he got into drugs much later on in life. Mr. Quandary would occasionally speak with George on a personal level. George would happily discuss just about anything with him. They had a fair-weather friendship of sorts. He would look out for George and bring him cigarettes if needed, and George would maintain his calm, polite demeanor in return. George grew to hate Vernon Healthcare. The constant sirens and patient alarms going off, and the steady stream of mistreatment and general neglect of patients bothered him. Finally, one day, George had been given new medication that he was not familiar with. Once the drugs were absorbed into his bloodstream, he flipped out, started yelling, shouting, becoming irate, and he fled from the facility and into the neighboring establishment's parking lot. At this point, the police department was called. There was a chain of followers trying to chase down George and usher him back to the facility. The chain of followers consisted of the staff developer, the facilities director, the director of nurses, an administrator in training, janitorial, Mr. Quandary, and a charge nurse named Charles. At one point, George was half circled by them, and he was still trying to get away. He eventually wandered into the street that was full of oncoming cars. Nurse Charles frantically tried to grab George, but he just swung at Charles aimlessly until they all half-assedly made their way across the street to a different establishment. When the negotiating tactics between George and staff ran dry, the police finally showed up. George, in his drug-induced, alarming state, was thrilled to see the police. He was so thrilled that he voluntarily got into the car of the police officer's cruiser. The cop confusedly asked the brigade of Vernon staff some questions, and then drove George away. It was rumored that George had died later on at Hollywood Community Hospital. That place is notorious for being a death house of sorts. A certain qualified patient could go there to be involuntarily experimented on. Meanwhile, the hallways are quieter than Christmas night, as everyone is also rumored to be sedated, docile, and generally controllable. Anyway, the story of George is one of many, and sadly, stuff like this happens all over the country. There are billions of dollars in misappropriated funds that come from social programs, and they are eventually traced back to the shadiest, skilled nursing facilities. All of this highly illegal, exuberantly unethical activity happens right under our noses. And we don't even bat an eyelash until it happens to us or our loved ones. Just food for thought, though, alright? Now back to Vernon and the recruiting of psych patients. Now, some of them allegedly are dangerous ex-cons. Some of them come from the streets, and also some have a history of heavy drug usage. A brief side note on that. Mr. Quandary met with the FBI and the DOJ, and he got the inside scoop on the seedy underbelly of this facility and the ownership. Here is my theory with an ownership mentality in regards to its skilled nursing facilities. If you, the ownership, are embroiled in ongoing legal issues at multiple facilities, you are probably going to correct as many deficiencies as you can at each facility to show that you are making an effort to rectify any wrongdoing. Doing so will distract any federal investigators for the time being, so you can make as much money as possible before finally breaking down and forcibly selling off one of your facilities due to numerous deficiencies and liabilities. Essentially, this is what happened with South Pasadena Convalescent Hospital, of which was previously under the watch of Shlomo before he was forced to sell it. This is a place that you wouldn't send your worst enemy. There are cockroaches in various areas, aggressive and overworked staff, paltry food that has accumulated mold over time, and an administration that cares nothing for the general well-being of their patients. An accumulation of G ratings or higher were at every single corner in this facility. Pure profit is the motive, right? Again, I know I sound like a broken record, but here's a word to the wise. Do not send your loved ones to a nursing facility. If you can afford to send them elsewhere, if not your own home, please do your research. Trust me, it behooves you to know that your loved one is being cared for properly and compassionately. In a society where patience is limited and audience members are finding time to pay attention to anything that piques their interests, I truly appreciate your attentiveness in that regard. And I thank you in general for expanding your horizons and welcoming a little bit of darkness into the crazy and beautiful world that we inhabit. For now, this is the Brimming Pot with your host, EQ Samuels. You can reach out to me via email at thebrimmingpot@gmail.com with any questions or concerns, or you can visit my Facebook page entitled The Brimming Pot. This concludes my first podcasting episode ever. I hope you all join me next time for episode 2, where I'll discuss the origins of evil and human nature. Yes, no segue, and not necessarily any linear thread between episodes. Just living my life and writing these podcasts in any order. Stay safe out there, and see you next time.